On this date in 1800, an actress was born in Ireland. Her name was Harriet Smithson. Miss Smithson went on to a successful and influential acting career, not in England, unfortunately for her, but in Paris, where her thick Irish accent, which apparently was a hindrance to her success on the English stage, was less of a factor on the Parisian stage. And apparently she made quite the impression in Paris. She was well known for her beauty on the stage, but also for the expressiveness of her voice and her talent as an actress. Apparently she was quite influential in the Parisian theater of that era, the early Romantic era, as it would be later known. Unfortunately for Miss Smithson, like many women of that particular period, she's less known for her own accomplishments based on her own talents and more for her relationship with a particular man. In this case, a composer named Hector Berlioz. Berlioz, just to kind of lay my cards out on the table, Berlioz was one of my favorite composers of all time. I deeply adore his music. Ever since I encountered it when I was in 7th grade playing a band transcription of one of the movements from one of the symphonies. He's just one of the most amazing voices in music of all time. He was also a very strange man, a very odd man. If you read about him, he was very fiery in his temperament. He was not an easy man for anyone to get along with. And what happened with Berlioz, he discovered Shakespeare and Harriet Smithson, the same night. In 1827, he attended a performance of Hamlet that was being performed by the English company that Smithson was a part of. He attended this performance even though he didn't speak English, so he didn't even understand the words of the play, but he was struck by the poeticness of the staging. He picked up enough of the story by just watching what was going on, but he was deeply, deeply struck by Miss Smithson to the point that he developed a very strong infatuation upon her. Now, when I was a kid and I would read about this story, it all sounded very romantic. This wonderfully talented young composer falls in love with a woman on the stage. He goes on to write for her his first symphony, which turns out to be one of the great symphonies of all time. And later she hears the symphony, realizes this love is real, and they marry. Obviously, it's quite a bit more complicated than that. Berlioz would in fact write the Symphonie fantastique, largely inspired by his love for Harriet Smithson. He actually depicted her in the work using a melody which he called the idée fixe, which is a single melody that shows up in each movement, a representational melody, one of the earliest ideas of representation in music that would later be discovered or advanced to its highest degree by such composers as Richard Wagner with leitmotifs in his operas. But Berlioz made a number of advances toward Harriet Smithson. She rejected him, finding him a bit pushy to the point of being creepy. Berlioz eventually went to Rome for a short time when he won the Prix de Rome as a composer. While down there, he had some other various romantic misadventures, but when he returned to Paris, and she was still there, still acting, he renewed his pursuit. And the story that I've heard is that he arranged for her to finally hear a performance of the Symphonie fantastique, which she did, and at that point she realized the infatuation was based on real feelings. They did meet, finally. They did become lovers. They did eventually marry. Apparently the marriage was against the better judgment of both of their respective groups of friends and family. And as you might suspect, given how based on stalkerish behavior it really was, the marriage was not successful. Eventually, Harriet Smithson ended up moving out of the house, living on her own. They never divorced. Berlioz did support her until her death, unfortunately, in 1854 when she was only 53 years old. but it was not a happy relationship. Berlioz, as you might surmise, just from the type of man he was, never did have a successful relationship. He had another marriage after which was after Harriet, which was equally a failure. He had a number of other relationships conducted either through mail or through the post of the day. Berlioz writes about a lot of this in his memoirs, which the memoirs of Berlioz, by the way, are one of the great artistic autobiographies of all time. It should really be read. I do recommend it. But there's one episode near the marriage which is described by Ernest Newman, the translator, in the footnotes. Berlioz does not always present the most honest picture of himself in his own writings. And this is from one of the footnotes. It appears from his letters that he at last conquered the reluctant Harriet in August by staging an attempt at suicide in her presence. After 2 hours vomiting from the effects of the opium he had taken and a further 3 days of illness, even Harriet was compelled to believe there was some sincerity in this young man's passion for her. She still fought, however, for a time, but Berlioz brought matters to a crisis by declaring he would go to Germany at once unless she married him. So basically, he kind of coerced his way into Harriet's life. Obviously not the romantic tale that I thought it was when I was a kid. But it still is just a fascinating part of music history, of art history, to know that the Symphonie fantastique, which is one of the great works of early musical romanticism, probably the first great truly romantic era symphony by anyone in Europe. When he wrote it in 1830, Beethoven had only died 3 years earlier. The classical era was still very much in memory, and romanticism in music was still just starting to flower. But it's worth remembering, poor Harriet, this real person who was apparently a real person of actual talent, of actual skill, and that doesn't really even matter, to be honest. I just think she deserves to be remembered better than pretty much as a footnote in her inspiring and admittedly extremely talented genius composer to put together a piece of music. So today I do suggest listening to the Symphonie fantastique, if you can, and think of Harriet Smithson when you're listening to it. Thanks a lot. My name is Kelly Settinger. I'm a writer, photographer, and dreamer living in the Buffalo, Niagara region of Western New York. More about me and by me can be found on my website at forgottenstars.net, and obviously hit the like and subscribe button. You don't have to smash the buttons, you can just click them. That's fine. Everybody's always saying smash the button. I don't get that. Anyway, Harriet Smithson, born this date, 1800.